Good evening and welcome back to the Asylum. It's me, Gunnar, in a chair of destiny, joined as always by my able compatriot CK. Easy fella.
Easy. Hello.
How are you, buddy?
I'm all right. I'm doing very well. How about yourself?
I'm all right, buddy. We're very fortunate today to be joined by Mr. Marc D'Antonio. Good evening, Marc.
Hey, how you doing, guys?
Very well, thank you, buddy. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Chris, for having me on the show.
Ricky, we've got a fascinating conversation lined up tonight with you, Marc, because you have a degree in astronomy. You are the Mutual UFO Network's chief photo and video analyst. You're the CEO of FX Models, a model making and special effects company specializing in digital and physical models and organic special effects in the film industry. You've got extensive work history in film and television, appearing regularly on a number of networks, including you also work on or created UFOTOG 2, a remote UFO detection system with Academy Award-winning director, Douglas Trumbull. Is that right? God, that's a lot to get in. I know even started on the bio yet.
No, that's all right. I mean, I just I put it together because I had people asking me all these questions about what do you do, and finally I told someone what I do, and they said, okay, here, I'll write this bio, and you tell me how accurate it is. And I read it, and I said, oh boy, that sounds really like I'm gushing all over the place. I mean, I'm not really comfortable with all that stuff. And he said to me, well, you did it, so go ahead, tell people. I go, I don't know. All right. So I kind of grudgingly allowed the bio to go out, but it's all true. I mean, it is what I do. Now, Doug and I have been friends for about 6 years, and it's not UFOTOG, it's UFOTOG. I mean, and we've changed the name. It's okay. It's okay because you're the second person. You're the second person to say that. But you know what? UFOTOG is actually UFOTOG is a very good name. Yeah, it's a great name. I like it. I like it a lot. It's actually very catchy.
Craziest fast food restaurant, isn't it?
Yeah, it's actually like get your to-go food right here. And by the way, here's a UFO. Wow, thank you. I always wanted one of these UFOs.
Yeah, quarter pounder that comes in a triangle box.
Yeah, right. My quarter pounder UFO to go. Yeah, but that's actually a very good name. But we've actually changed the name because when you have the word UFO in the title of any project, science goes running away. And while we're actually hunting unidentified flying objects, or the possibility of unidentified flying objects, manned by advanced races visiting our planet, while we're doing that, we also have to keep in mind that there's a far bigger or another use for this entire remote sensing system, this remote detection system. That use is to monitor the skies for meteors, monitor the universe for the potential killer asteroid, and to be able to track objects that are up in space that are nearby or in our atmosphere. And this is important data that we don't actually have full access to now. Now, I've worked with Dave Schock in the CubeSat program. The CubeSat guys are great. I love Dave. He's fantastic. And we're kind of, he wants to view the Earth from above. I want to view it from below. And whereas he'll orbit the Earth, we will sit on the Earth and let the universe, rotate past us on a daily and nightly basis, because this thing works day or night. That's the whole point. It sees things in the air or in the sky. Now, the idea, once it's finished, because we don't have a working unit yet, we're still working on it. It's going to view the sky with a variety of sensors, and this extra data that it's going to bring in is going to actually be what's called corroborative data. It's going to corroborate a sighting. Suppose the cameras, which it'll also have, see something in the visual wavelength, and that thing in the visual wavelength moves into the infrared. Okay, now that could be a meteor that comes streaking in, and then as you see the heat signature left behind, okay, you'll see that. But if that also had a burst of gamma rays when it came in or went out, or if the local magnetic field changes, or the local gravity changes, or we get a spike in electromotive force, right? The EMF, electrical energy in the ground at the same time, then that's corroborative data. It's telling us that something different is happening associated with this event, potentially. And so that's what we're doing. We're actually using six to eight different instruments on board this, we call them platters, on board each platter. And the idea is that not only the cameras are there, so it's not like you have a shaky cell phone video of this thing that this person swears went across the sky and did a zigzag, okay? Well, we'll
There's
be able
one
to
or two
record
of those around.
I've
Right?
seen that.
There's
Right?
one or two of those.
Yeah, there are, man. And so if you look in the sky with this stationary platter and you see this thing zigzag in the sky, if every time it zigs, you get a burst of gamma rays, say,
Yeah.
you see, that's something that we call a smoking gun.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We're talking about physical evidence of to all
Yes.
purposes, extraterrestrial craft, if that's indeed what it is we're dealing with.
Right.
But-
Because we could quickly rule out whether it's actually a, human-made.
Meteor or
Or human-made, right? We can rule out a natural or human-made object fairly quickly. I might have. I don't know if you saw the Sun article that Emma Perry wrote about me in the UK Sun. I know it's a tabloid to some extent, but she actually did a very good job, and the article states exactly what I told her and left out what I told her not to put in. I mean, she did a very good job, and it was about seeing an unidentified submerged object. When I was on
this is a recent article as well, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, and I was on a nuclear submarine as a guest of the Navy back when they were doing that. There was a time when you could go for a ride if you were, you did a lot of stuff for them, as I did, and so they, because I am a Navy contractor, I have worked for them since 1995, and so and that's with my own business. So
now, Mark, this story went on to make worldwide news, didn't it? What you were saying, and it's quite amazing, really.
Yeah, it did, and it's like, well, I guess that's what happens when I mentioned it briefly in my talk out in Wyoming in the United States here at Devil's Tower UFO Rendezvous, which is an absolutely wonderful. It was a first-time conference, and for the first time, it was pulled off with panache and with quality. So I give Bob Olson and Laurie Tucker credit for pulling that off. It was very, very well done. So hopefully folks in the UK will take a venture over to Wyoming and see the spectacular Devil's Tower National Monument, but also come to the conference and hear us speak. I've got another different talk for next year that I'm going to do. So we're going to get a lot of people coming back, actually.
So, Mark,
repeats.
Could I ask?
Yeah.
This sort of machine for scanning the sky. Can it take like a large chunk of sky, or are you going to kind of send it to hot spots and try and work it out from there?
That's a very good question, and Doug and I wrestled with this from the beginning because he created UFOTOG before I ever even knew him. And UFOTOG was this Humvee that had a hydraulic roof that would open up, and this giant lift would come out with 5 or 6 telescopes and sensors on it and would spin around in the sky, find something moving in the sky, and lock onto it and track it.
Yes.
Now, that's great, but it's one unit, and it costs many, many dollars to make. So I said to Doug, as he was thinking the same thing, why don't we just dispense with the entire vehicle and just make these little platters that will all do the same thing, but without any moving parts?
Mark, is this your background as an astronomer that's led to this? Because I know they do this with radio telescopes, don't they? They set up like a net of 10 or 15 radio telescopes in order to get a bigger view of the sky, is it?
Yes, that's precisely right. And you say radio telescopes. I actually built a radio telescope. But when I actually worked at a science center as an astronomer years ago, I built a radio telescope to listen to Jupiter's moon Io.
Dude, that is the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, because Io would make these strange noises that were indicative of this torus of material around it that it would give off every time it was Jupiter. But so yes, I mean. We want to mount these on the ground, put them within a mile of each other, and put them in a perfect equilateral triangle.
Yeah.
Okay. So that equilateral triangle, each baseline being a mile, there'll be 3 units, and we call those triads. So one triad would be in place, say out in the desert west of Phoenix. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if Unit 1 in the 3 sees something, the first thing it does is send a message to Unit 2 and 3 that it's seeing something over here. And Unit 2 and 3 will now do a scan of the sky there. I mean, they're doing it constantly, but because of battery conservation measures, it may not be fully active at that moment. And then when it sees something and 2 and 3 don't see it, then we know that it's local to 1. But if say Unit 1 and 2 see it, now we can do other things. Not only do we have 5 or 6 readings from instrumentation, on each platter, but we also have the ability to triangulate and to get distance and altitude and speed
You
of the
can
object.
start
Now,
mapping these things. You can start working out
that's
whether it's
exactly
going
right.
from west to east, whether it's elliptical, whatever it is. You know, it's grazing the
Right.
You know, you've got some
Now, do you see-
serious data, basically.
Yeah, the value of this is that we can actually say for the first time, let's look at meteors. We can actually map meteor strikes in the atmosphere in 3D.
Wow.
Okay, that's never been done. You just see
That's
these things
freaking
streaking into the
cool.
atmosphere, but
Yeah.
only when coincidentally is it, they're seen across multiple photographers at the same time can they come up with a semblance of a 3D picture. We're going to do it because these cameras are always on. They're always looking up because there's 7 cameras per platter, and together they all make up the whole dome of the sky that they can see.
Oh,
All right.
wow.
So they're always seeing things. And what we're going to do when Unit 1 connects to Unit 2 and says, I saw something here, then Unit 2 will pick out that location, all right? And Unit 1 and Unit 2 will pick out that location where something happened and send all the data associated with that location to us via GPS. And that is to say, this already works actually. It's a system that actually transmits to GPS satellites and will completely provide all the information for the sighting right to our smartphone in our pocket. So I could be sitting here in my office and get a bzzz. Oh, what's that? Oh, unit 1 and 2 in Wickenburg, Arizona, recorded a hit. Now let's go see it. Now, phase 1 is that I'd have to call MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, because our field investigators from MUFON are going to be our boots on the ground for phase 1.
I love
and they're going to go
idea.
out. They're going to go out to the desert and to the units, and they're going to retrieve the stored information on each platter for the sighting. Now that's phase 1. Phase 2 is we're going to be able to dial in, call up each unit, and each unit will have a little FTP server, and we'll be able to download what it saw.
Oh, yes.
Kind of like your security camera system where you have a little DVR.
Yeah.
Okay,
Or
we're gonna have that going. Now that's a further phase, and it's going to take some work. So, getting all this stuff to talk to each other, that's the big thing. And we're thinking of using a special program, and we have some guys that are, some very, very high-end coders. I was a programmer for 15 years, but I don't want to get into doing this kind of embedded machine code.
That's the long work, isn't it? It's constant coding and fault finding.
Yeah, I mean, I want to test it. I want to test it, implement it, and make sure it works.
UFOs. Coming back to the beginning then, Mark, what you're talking about is basically the idea, and I guess it's kind of like Star Trek, that if craft are entering our solar system, if we're having interdimensional travelers or whatever it is in terms of UFOs, then there must be kind of some sort of trace of that, like a subspace message, sir, there's a Klingon warship behind that moon. How do you know? Well, we got a subspace, like sort of feedback or whatever it was, we managed to track it. So ultimately that's roughly what you're doing. But what you're also saying is that it has a much bigger implication in terms of tracking near Earth objects. And particularly the idea, I know that NASA have reckoned they've tracked about 10,000 of these things, but they're talking about the big ones, aren't they? Because they're using radio telescopes to bounce signals off stuff that is actually big enough to send a signal off. But what you're talking about actually provides a real delicate infrastructure in terms of there are many more ways to detect, let's say, a meteorite, an asteroid, bearing in mind because of the types of things that it gives off. So we're creating a framework really that can really keep the Earth safe in terms of near Earth objects and meteorites and asteroids. And like I say, we're able to map and track these things and provide way more data than we have been up to now. But the other side of it is also if stuff is visiting our solar system, we could also possibly find evidence of that as well. That's
right, as a matter of fact. And
it's
we
freaking
actually
genius.
we have a term for that too. When we notice like this residual leftover, say something is traveling interdimensionally, say.
Yeah.
Okay. There's theories, and my friend Robert Schroeder wrote a book called Solving the UFO Enigma, and he's a very smart guy, aeronautical engineer, and Bob, studied the effects of unidentified flying objects as seen by people, and then relayed them to the possibility that they're using an advanced propulsion concept that's sort of buried within string theory. Now,
Right.
if that's the case, remember, physics is the same for everybody in our universe. It's not just ours, it's everybody else's too. And we may not be as advanced, obviously, as some other race of beings. So if they make the transition from one dimension to another, okay, or shift what are called membranes in string theory, okay, if they shift their brain around, so to speak, that's B-R-A-N-E, right?
Yeah.
Membrane. If they shift their brain around, then during that shift, there may very well be a explosion of what's called Hawking radiation at that point. Now, that is something that's also associated with gamma rays. And if we look for gamma rays, because Hawking radiation is notoriously difficult if it really exists at all, we know gamma rays exist, and we can find gamma rays. We can see gamma rays. In fact, your iPhone can detect gamma rays, believe it or not. It's crude, but it can do it. There's an app to do it, believe it or not, and it's part of the sensor. Now, we call those residual traces, and every 15-year-old loves me for this, we call those skid marks.
So there's some adults who quite like that name.
I was going to say that's about our level of humor anyway.
Well, those are the skid marks of an advanced civilization using advanced technology. And that's what our system is all about. Now, again, we've changed the name. It's not UFOTOG 2 anymore. It used to be a numeral 2, UFOTOG 2. Now it's actually called the AADS, the Aerial Anomaly Detection System. We're probably going to shorten that too, to Anomaly Hunter or something like that, but we're not sure yet. But we want to do this because when you have the word UFO in a project name, funding
that's kind of game over science-wise, isn't it?
Yes. This is something a university could do.
I was going to say that there's a real scientific application to this that could actually keep humans safe, actually preserve human life or all life on this planet ultimately. So it's a real advancement in terms of that. But like I say, the flip side of it, the trade-off is actually we could really end up detecting other stuff as well. I think it's genius, dude. I've got to take my hat off here. I'm not going to lie.
Thanks,
it's a wicked idea. We often see this, don't we, ufology? It's difficult to make an imprint, in a sense. It's difficult to carry the field forward, to do something that's going to change the paradigm, that's going to provide more information. And, very often in ufology, we often look back at old cases, we often look back at old stories, we often try and glean what we can from them, but there's nothing really moving forward. And what you're doing is moving the field forward hugely, not just scientifically in terms of tracking near-Earth objects, but also potentially proving the existence of life outside of this planet.
But it gives us also an extra dimension to the research as well, because all of the research that we've had is, like you say, kind of grainy, shaky footage and personal accounts, personal testimonies.
Yeah. And now we're talking about the three elements of evidence, Chris, I guess. And this, we're talking about actual, I guess, physical evidence, real data of saying this happened.
That's right. That's right. In astronomy, my specialty is exoplanets. Okay, that's right. Kind of have gone with my astronomy, and in studying exoplanets and the current finds and all the different programs for finding exoplanets out there, I've talked to the researchers, out in Hawaii, the Gemini telescope, and elsewhere. And my conviction, and it's the subject of my book, my conviction is that it's a populated universe, and that's the name of the book, The Populated Universe. And I remember when I was getting my astronomy degree, I tell this story often. I don't know if you heard it. I was talking to the chair of my department, and I said that I believe, and I used the phrase, I said, I believe it's a populated universe. And he looked at me, and he says, what are you talking about? I said, I believe that if Earth is here, it stands to reason that others are here. I said, look at us. We're an ordinary planet around an ordinary star. And I said, let's accept that it was a fairly unique chain of circumstances that brought this particular life form to the forefront as an intelligent species. I said, and intelligence is a journey and not necessarily an ultimate destination. It's a journey, a foray. It may or may not happen. I mean, here on Earth, dolphins have a brain as equally as big as ours, but they're not driving cars and doing physics that we know of. But the fact is, the fact is, and I said to him, I said, I believe it's a populated universe. And he looked at me, and I gave him my little spiel, my tirade. And he looked at me over the top of his glasses, and he said, Mr. D'Antonio, get back in the observatory and leave Captain Kirk to us. Yeah.
You're like, well, thanks. Cheers.
Thanks. Well, also it's kind of a telling statement. Leave it to us also might imply that they know, or that they certainly have an inkling themselves.
Well, at the time, I think what he was saying to me was, I don't give a crap about that. I just want to get more telescope data. So get back in there and start working on the parallax program again.
I need funding to get another telescope.
That's right. I need that, and they did actually get another telescope. So yeah, no, there's a tremendous amount of that going on, and you know, when you get into academia and you're stuck in academia and your tenure depends on production and what you produce, then you end up in a position where you're not allowed to think for yourself. You're not allowed to think about those what they'd call fringe topics. But
it's not something that's widely talked about in academia, but the funding issue and the way that it works means that essentially you're doing the research that other people want you to do.
Right. Now think about this. The media has always considered people who believe in extraterrestrial life to be the tinfoil hat crowd, and it becomes the
I know I'm wearing mine.
Yeah, well, right. It becomes the funny story. It becomes the lighthearted, comedy bit for the news. And let's bring it up a notch. Let's smile a bit. And they come up with this funky story about someone seeing a UFO. And of course, they always show the obligatory blow up alien thing or whatever. Well, the truth is that the media is still like that, but academia is not. Academia knows that with the 1975 Project Famous expedition to the deep ocean vents, which we now know are the black sulfide chimneys that are spewing mineral-laden water up from the water that's been circulated down into the warmer regions near the mantle, that there's now little oases of life. And that life is not photosynthetic life, like on the surface, needing the light of the sun, but it's chemosynthetic life.
They're quite large oases, aren't they?
Yeah, and actually,
I was watching a TV program on it the other day. It said it's more biodiverse than the Amazon rainforest.
Yeah, well, and guess what? It's very isolated too. Now that's started by itself, right?
I was going to say, you're talking, Mark, about extremophiles, aren't you?
Absolutely. Now that's where it starts.
I was going to say
we were extremophiles.
Well, exactly. You just took the point. We talked about this on the show many moons ago. Do you remember this, Chris, when we were talking about exoplanets? And Pete was on the show, and he said, "We are the extremophiles. We are the ones that basically exist in this weird kind of out there kind of." Yeah. Like everything else in the solar system, everything else in the universe probably has a much different kind of chemical makeup to us and a different process of life. But it's right. Us that are strange. It's more than likely that alien life exists out there, and it's much more like the things that you're talking about, things that come off hydrothermal vents or live in Lake Vostok in the middle of the Antarctic or something.
That's right. Yeah, Vostok's a great example. What we might find on Mars. Potentially, because there's going to be potentially what we know. There's water subsurface on Mars. What's there? We don't know.
But here's the thing, okay?
Isn't it? Yeah, it's true, because we're here. We think this is what it is.
Yeah.
And this is what life's supposed to be.
Yeah. If it's going to be out there, it's going to look like us.
Right. But we've had 5 major extinction events on the planet. Okay. Well, 3. Okay. 2 were where biodiversity just sort of shrunk to nothing for a while. Okay. But effectively, it was an extinction event. Okay. So we've lost up to 98% of all the life forms on this earth. And yet here we are. Now, out of the holes, it arise new opportunities, and so new creatures arose out of that murk, that remaining capability, and the very bacteria that cleanse the CO2 from the air, and of course the oceans, which are wonderful carbon dioxide eaters. Okay, the very bacteria that actually made oxygen basically for us to breathe, were literally killing themselves because oxygen is toxic to them. It's a waste product, so you're breathing bacterial waste for one thing, just so you know. And the other thing is, if our oceans didn't form, then we wouldn't have plankton, and plankton produce half of the oxygen on the earth. Okay, the forests and everything else do the rest. So plankton is the most important, arguably the most important oxygen generator on the planet. Now, the reason that oxygen is in our atmosphere is somewhat of an oddity. It's not supposed to be there. If you look at other planets, other exoplanets, we see oxygen in some of the atmospheres, some of the water vapors and things like that. But we also notice that oxygen is easily bound up in crustal elements and wants to be. It wants to get out of the atmosphere. So our planet is not in equilibrium. It's in something called disequilibrium.
Wow.
And disequilibrium is the reason we're here.
What a thought,
because
though,
the Earth, it's not even it's factual.
Yeah.
Okay. If the plankton and the forests weren't producing an overabundance of oxygen, then our planet would long since have eliminated oxygen from the air.
And thus, similar to the ways Mars did.
That's correct. In
it's
fact,
locked
if
up
you look
in the permafrost in many respects. There's plenty of oxygen
that's
there,
true.
but it's frozen.
Right, and also the oxygen in Mars' atmosphere, because it could, because Mars didn't have a magnetic field of any merit to block the ultraviolet radiation. The H2O, the water vapor in the atmosphere, was disassociated by ultraviolet rays hitting these molecules and breaking them apart into their atoms. And the hydrogen disappeared to space, and the oxygen, well, where'd it go? It went down to the ground. And what does oxygen do? It likes to bind up with chemicals and compounds. And what did it do? It bound up with the iron compounds and made iron oxide, which is rust.
Rust.
And what color is rust?
The red planet.
You got it. Okay, so I mean that's a simple approach thinking about it that way. But if you think about it, you look at Mars and say, "Oh, I know what happened." I get what happened. And the mineralogy does support that. So our planet is in disequilibrium. It is not equal in equilibrium. And so if you're looking for life elsewhere, you want to hunt for a planet perhaps that has an oxygen atmosphere. And if it does, you know that something is replenishing that oxygen at a more prodigious rate than it can be consumed by the compounds and minerals on the planet. And what is that something? A life form, most likely. Yeah, see, and that's the point. And that's why I think when the James Webb Telescope goes up next year,
yes,
it'll be able to look, it's primarily an infrared system. It's primarily going to look for the atmospheres of exoplanets. And it's going to see amazing vistas. It's going to see other things like never before, but it's going to be able to detect these atmospheres and tell us what's in them.
Now, on that subject, Mark, if we drill down into it, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, what happens is it the redshift? So it's the difference in the light that the telescope receives, which they're able to work out via the spikes what components the atmosphere may have.
Not redshift. It's actually spectra.
So redshift is the distance between and the moving away of galaxies. Isn't it?
Well, yeah.
But they're looking through the atmosphere basically, and almost looking through a cross section of it, and using the sun behind it to work out what components or constituent parts the atmosphere has. I think, isn't it?
Yeah, that's very close. Actually, what happens is when a star first starts to transit, when a planet first starts to transit in front of its star, okay, what are we going to see first? We're going to see its atmosphere, if it has one. Okay, its atmosphere is going to now induce some type of lines, additional chemical lines in the spectra of that star. That's called contamination. All right, it's a contaminant. All right, to the spectra. Okay, astronomers, we love terms. Okay, and that spectral contamination is going to tell us something important. It'll tell us, for instance, if we see lines of H2O, okay, that are out in the red, red part of the spectrum, okay, then we'll say, there's water vapor in this atmosphere, okay, or we might see absorption lines. They'll be what are called absorption lines too, dark bands, and you'll see these dark oxygen or something else, methane perhaps. Oh well, you can't breathe that, or whatever. But again, we're not looking for life like us. We're looking for an overabundance of oxygen that may also be perhaps part and parcel to another atmosphere that has, say, more methane or less nitrogen or hydrogen or perhaps or some other helium or something else in an atmosphere that another set of beings may have evolved into.
Could you imagine the ones that breathe helium?
I can, and it's probably pretty cool.
It's probably a lot like that, actually, Mark. Yeah.
That's right. Or unless it's the
like
hydro.
Santa's workshop. Or something.
Oh yeah.
We are Santa's elves.
Yeah, I know.
In a distant solar system.
Right. I used to back when it was okay to do this. I used to when I used to lecture, I would actually sometimes take a hit off of helium, out of a balloon, and then walk up to the podium and I'd say,
hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name.
and I go through it like this until the helium was exhausted, and look at the horrified looks on the people in the audience. And then I would cough and take a deep breath and say, actually, I don't talk like that. I was just doing that. Here's the balloon. I was just, it's a way to break the ice, so to speak.
Nice. Yeah, I like that.
That is
Yeah,
right
if you
up
don't
our
pass
street,
out,
Chris. That is right up our street.
Yeah.
That's exactly the kind of mischief we get up to as well, Mark.
Yeah, well, I have that kind of sense of humor, and unfortunately, it can get me in trouble, and sometimes it works. But yeah, so I'm a big fan of seeing the science through. I'm a big fan of making sure we have scientific data, and it's all because of my exploration of exoplanets and the science associated with exoplanets. I don't see a reason why there can't be another advanced species out there, far more advanced than we are, because I'm going to point out one little thing here to you as well, and I'll relay a talk I just did recently as well with this. If you were to look at our planet, it's 4.5 billion years old, right? Just about 4.6. All right. Well, the universe exists for 13.8 billion years. Now, that means that the universe has been here for just over 9 billion years before the Earth was even formed. Now, in the 4.6 billion years that we've been here, we've come to this level of our advancement. We might have been farther along as a different type of species if we reached intelligence without the major extinctions. Who knows? Or we might not even be out of the slime had we had more extinctions. So it's we can't predict how long it takes a civilization to become quote unquote advanced to that point. Now, obviously, we think that we're as advanced as we can be. We can see that there's some things that we can't do, but if it took us that long to become sentient and become advanced, then you look back at the universe that existed for, literally twice that already. And for a couple million years, say after the Big Bang, there were no planets. But then after the heavier elements were formed in supernovae and in merging neutron stars and so forth, then the planetary systems start to form. And so there could have been a civilization that formed, say, 4 billion years into the existence of the universe. And perhaps 6 billion years later, they became highly advanced. Okay. And, over a long period of time. And then perhaps they began to go through, say, what we now know as the Kardashev scale. Civilizations that use increasingly higher amounts of energy to achieve higher and higher goals and go farther and farther distances using more and more of their resources, including other solar systems, planets, stars, even the galaxies. So perhaps there is a galactic race, or more than one galactic race, that is flying around our galaxy. Maybe there really is a Star Trek Federation of sorts.
Yes.
And now, and it's kind of odd when you think about it. If someone had a cell phone that looked like Captain Kirk's communicator, they would say, "Get rid of this piece of junk." I want a screen that I can touch and move around. I don't want to flip something and say, beam me up. There's no intelligent life here. I mean, you don't want to do that. Okay, that's old technology. But back in the 60s, you see, that was the pinnacle. So, we move forward in little tiny spurts and technologies and wars, unfortunately, further our technological prowess. But, if you consider civilization may have done this already, it's possible that they saw string theory and Alcubierre drive possibilities, the warp drive, for a million years before us. And it only would take them probably about 5,000 years to actually pursue that to the point where they could go interstellar and use it as a daily routine. In other words, they could go to Mars in just a few minutes and back. They could have lunch on Mars, for instance, and then come back to Earth for dinner. I mean, it could literally be that type of advancement if the civilization moves along. Now, for us, that's far future science fiction, and we laugh. Ha, ha, ha. That'll never happen here. But then again, the sound barrier was never going to be broken either, guys.
Yes.
Very true.
Right? So, and you can just add up the technology leaps that we've made that were never going to happen, so to speak.
I was going to say, Mark, when you look at the sheer length and existence of the universe, it's pretty plausible, isn't it? That, like as you're saying there, it takes it could take up to about 5,000 years for somebody to become potentially capable of traveling around their solar system. Yet we're talking about a universe that's 13.6 billion years old. Like you say, okay, let's take the 0.6 off for argument's sake and say that there's 13 billion possible years that civilizations could have risen and fallen. We could literally be living in a bubble, in a tiny little rock pool next to a giant ocean, completely unaware of the magnitude of stuff that exists all around us.
I know, yeah, you're right. I make a joke. When we look out as far as we could see, we see the 3-degree cosmic background radiation as the microwave background that we see. So I make a joke that because we see that in all directions, we are actually just in a microwave that somebody forgot to take the pot out of, and we're in that pot, in their microwave, in some kitchen, in some other universe. Okay, I mean it seems that way to me. We're just in a big microwave, But what you're saying is correct. Okay, we don't have a good perception of the universe or whether there's more than one. Now, there was a study a few years ago that said, look, there's a possibility that there isn't enough mass to have created the Big Bang. So where's the missing mass? Well, now they think maybe they might have found it without having to use multiple universes as a solution. Yeah. Okay, but regardless, there is a possibility that multiple universes could have been forged when the Big Bang occurred. If the Big Bang is even the right way. I mean, we just look at that's like going into the heart of an explosion from inside the cloud and then being asked, okay, what made this explosion happen and where did it originate from? And you're inside the cloud looking around, you're inside the debris cloud that's expanding all around you. And you're going, okay, well, let's see. And that's our job. That's what we've done, right? That's what the cosmologists have done. The cosmology is the study of the overall larger structures of the universe and to look at how galactic formation occurred and where galaxies are going, how galaxies are moving, how the universe formed. I mean, cosmologists, ponder those types of questions all the time, I think. And I think it's very important to understand that, as much as we know very little overall. We're not there yet.
I was going to say, it's like CSI Universe, isn't it?
Exactly so. That's a great way to put it.
You guys
CSI Universe.
What's going on here? Let's follow the trail. Where did this explosion take place? How did it start? Who did what? How did this happen?
Right. Welcome to CSI Universe, where we have all the mysteries of the universe that we can still not solve. Thank you very much. We'll be right back after these words.
That's got 11 seasons in it, that has. It's just a question that can never be answered.
I think we could definitely get Netflix interested.
Wow.
But Mark, so I know we've kind of talked about the potential for other races on the planet. Do you believe that they've been sort of visiting here, or do you believe that they kind of tour around, or
Well, I can tell you, the truth is, when I was actually, and I mentioned this to you when I was when we were before we actually started on the air. I was on board a nuclear submarine and as a guest back when they did that, and I saw on the sonar, I was sitting there trying to get rid of my seasickness because I was seasick and it was a quiet area, and the sonar operator quickly called the executive officer over because something was moving on the sonar he couldn't recognize, and he called it a fast mover. And to me, a fast mover could have been a torpedo, and I thought, oh great, I'm going to die out here. I'm supposed to be a guest. It's supposed to be a fun trip, and now I'm going to die. That's what I thought. That was terrifying. Yeah, I didn't, I didn't know what to do. But anyway, they looked at the screen. They saw this really faint line, and I saw this faint line. This track. Okay, it's a very faint green line. Okay, and the officer said, "How fast is that moving?" And you can't hear everything because the submarine's loud inside. And I know it's the quietest ship and quietest boat in the sea. But the fact is, the sound doesn't get out, but it's loud inside. It's like a cacophony of sound everywhere you are in a boat, like that. So anyway, he looked at the screen, did something, and said, "It's moving several hundred knots." And the executive officer kind of twerked his head a little bit and said, "What?" but he understood it. He recognized it as something that he knew could be, as I found out. And the kid said, "Oh, well, what do I do with this?" And I heard him tell the kid, "Log it and dog it." So log it and basically hide it, or bury it.
Wow.
Now, a couple years later, I had to do a job for very high-ranking officials in Washington, the folks that advise the president, in fact, in the Navy. And so I did this project, and I happened to be in the home of one of those leaders. And it was just him and me, okay? And because I brought him this project I had worked on just for him privately. And I leaned over and I asked him, I said, "What can you tell me about the fast mover program?" And I thought I was going to wet my pants because I was like nervous about asking him that question. I thought, "Oh, this is the end of our friendship, if I ask this question." But I did. I asked it, and he just leaned back and he said, "I can't talk about that program, Mark. I'm sorry."
Wow.
And I was like, "Yeah." And that was the topic of the
He
Sun
said
article.
that there was a program.
That's what I took away from it.
Yeah,
by
he's
saying
confirmed
nothing.
it's real, but he can't tell you about it.
Right. And so he didn't violate anything.
Of course. He stayed within the data protection.
Yeah, as we do. I've also been in that world. I had to live in that world since 1995. I was doing that kind of work, and I had cases where people were reporting UFOs out in Idaho, but I knew that it was a classified project being tested out there. So I pressed the program office to make a public statement saying this is not an alien device. It's not. I said, tell them. And they said to me initially, "Don't tell them anything." And I said, but let me tell you what happens if I tell them nothing, like you suggest. If I tell them nothing, they're going to think that there's a UFO flying around here on a daily basis and even nightly basis. And what's that going to do? That's going to get more people out here with more cameras. And you're going to end up with a public relations nightmare. If you tell them it's one of ours, they'll go away. And I heard nothing for about 3 or 4 days, and then I got my statement, which I released to them, to the folks. They made a statement saying it's one of our Navy projects, and it was. Okay. Well, anyway, that is an example of how my kind of work that I do in the Navy was in conflict with the work I do for the Mutual UFO Network, and I had to tread very lightly on both sides because I didn't want people thinking that I was a sellout or a government plant. Okay, because I'm not. I mean, crying out loud. If anything, that got me in trouble because of my work with them. I was always had an eye on the kind of technologies that they were coming up with. Okay, the next one, by the way, just so you know, are going to be the tiny little drones that are the size of your thumbnail.
Ooh.
Okay. They already have these little tiny drones the size of a housefly, and they have little lights on them. And so you'll see these little things buzzing around, and you'll say, "What the heck? Why is that fly got a red light on it? Or why is that bug got a red light on it?" It's actually a battery indicator, for the guys, flying this, DoD drone, this little tiny drone, and they fly in swarms. So they just throw them into the air, and they just independently start taking off and doing their mission. The idea, it's an idea actually I came up with years ago, to create a swarm concept for you can just take a handful of these things, take them out of your pocket, fling them into the air, and they'll go down a street, say in Iraq, and map every single inhabitant of a building, okay, with the infrared or with other possibilities, and to make sure that they did it, and that they're expendable. Then they die after about 5 minutes.
Have you seen the Slaughterbots video?
What's that?
Have you seen the Slaughterbots video that's going on the rounds at the moment? So
I might have.
Exactly this idea. It's just a video somebody's kind of produced on the internet, but it's his idea that they've got these drone craft, like, as you mentioned, and you kind of chuck them in the air as a swarm, and they contain within them an explosive device, so they can isolate a target, and then they can pick on that target, fire into the temple of the target, explode the detonation, and kill them instantly. And it's like, Jesus, that's actually plausible. It's actually, the technology exists right now. Is a scary thing about it.
It does, because I was actually in a DoD contest actually to create a drone that could fly a very specific course and create a very specific pattern of movement over a particular length of distance. I think it was like a 1 mile course. And and I entered into that contest so I could do it. Unfortunately, as I was getting all my stuff ready, somebody else had already pursued it and won the contest. So I was sort of a late starter, but we did create one of the first drones here. I actually got it hangs from the ceiling here. It's a original quadcopter that we created. It's made of aluminum, and it very, very lightweight aluminum actually. And but it's like the technology takes leaps and bounds, and when you've got the Chinese economic engine behind and the Japanese economic engine behind the development of these other drone systems, it's better to partner with them than make them our enemy. I can tell you right now. Make them your friend. Okay.
Keep your
you
enemies
want them on your side.
Keep your enemies closer.
Keep your enemies closer.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Mark,
that's stuff. But so I'm a big drone guy. I'm kind of like I've got a fleet of them here that I use. I have infrared drones that I can use to help find lost children or whatever and stuff. It's
wow.
Because
the applications are incredible for that. We could use it for negative. We could use it to fight wars, but ultimately we could also use it to colonize planets, find information out about Mars. I mean, these are one of the ideas that they're talking about using on Mars, isn't it? Is landing a craft and releasing these drones so they can go and map underground caverns that we could possibly live in while we're there. We can find resources. We can 3D map the planet. We can work out and these things. I guess they could go everywhere, couldn't they? They could literally ride on the breeze.
Yeah, but keep in mind on Mars, okay, the atmosphere is only 0.08 of ours. So the atmospheric pressure is effectively a vacuum. So it would need some other, it can't just use propellers. Okay, it would have to use something else. I mean, you could literally, if you could hang it from a big enough helium balloon, say, you could speed that helium balloon around Mars very, very quickly.
Wow.
And it wouldn't, end up being, subject to a lot of drag because the atmosphere is very, very thin. But yes, you're right. I mean, there is a technique for doing that kind of stuff. And I used it actually in Arizona. I flew infrared drone around to actually find water. And by looking at the infrared imagery, especially at night after the desert had cooled, the areas where there was water under the surface remained a little bit cooler than the areas around it. So cool. I could map out where the water was flowing under the desert. And it was correct, I think, and so I did this actually in the Sonoran Desert, or a period of a few days, in the middle of the summer, actually. But after the sun went down, mostly around midnight, maybe 1 in the morning, I'd fly up there and take off, and I'd see coyotes and I'd see other creatures out there, but I would also see the water marks and the marks where the water was, things you could not see during the day, So yes, there's value to it that way. And again, it's all electromagnetic energy, and isn't that what our aerial anomaly detection system is all about? It's just using electromagnetic radiation to our benefit, trying to solve issues, trying to solve puzzles.
I love it. I'd love to spend a weekend in your house, just with the ideas that you probably come up with. You know what we could do? We could do this, and if I can map the electromagnetic field, and what I could do is I can track interdimensional craft. Like, oh my God, Mark, let's do it. Let's go.
Oh, I got to tell you, I have for all the seasons of What on Earth, that show and NASA's Unexplained Files, they come out here to film for the different seasons, and so. When they're here, they send me a bunch of stories, and they get here at like 9 in the morning, and they just never get leave before 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. There's just always more to look at. I mean, for instance, for one episode of NASA's Unexplained Files, we addressed the so-called lunar landing hoax, and I addressed one particular thing, which basically said, well. They were saying that the shadows go the wrong way. You see the shadows are going multiple directions. And it's true. It looks like they are doing that. And so I built a moon. I built a flat slab of a moon here in my studio space. And we put a light at the far end, a single light that I got from Doug Trumbull's studio. He let me borrow this what's called a 1K. And I set it up in the far distance, making a very low angle on our moon set. Okay. And when the camera was down low, and I had craters, and I even had astronauts and a lunar module, on it. A very well made, in fact, lunar module. I gave it to one of my model makers who made it. I let him have it. So when you look at this thing now on this set, and you look at the craters, the shadows are going all the wrong way. And you look back at the other light and you say, wait, there is only one light here. And then you look at the moon craters that were made and they're going the wrong way. But then if you raise the camera up and look down on top, then those shadows that are going the wrong way are all going the right way.
Yeah.
And the reason is because of the terrain undulating. Yes. And there's no reference points on the moon. There's no reference points. You don't know how far away that hill is. That hill is, 10 miles away. It looks like it's around 300, feet away, so you don't know. You don't have any kind of references, no trees to tell you how far away something is. So, stuff like that. So that's the kind of thing. So they come out here, and when you have these sets set up, oh man, next thing you know, we're here for hours, and they're saying, what if you do this? What if you did? Oh, that's cool. Let's try this, and it just goes on. I even made lunar soil, for that particular. I made regolith. Yeah, I actually studied the lunar soil. I made a copy that does everything that the lunar soil does except cut you, because lunar soil is actually pretty glassy. If you think of it as pulverized glass,
silicate base, isn't it? Yeah, it's from the volcanic eruptions, I believe, and the creation of the moon and all of that sort of stuff. But it's largely silicate based, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, well, you keep in mind that the moon had no atmosphere to speak of. It actually does have an atmosphere, by the way, just so everybody knows. It's very, very tenuous, but it's there. Sodium and so forth. But if you look at the moon and you run a handful of it through your hands, you might end up, feeling some abrasions or having some pretty rough skin after, because that is really without an atmosphere. When a crater is made and an asteroid strikes or a meteor strikes the moon, molten rock is made instantly in that impact because of the transfer of the kinetic energy to the moon surface. That energy turns into heat and it melts everything. Now, it cools over time, all right, as it radiates away the thermal energy, but that takes a lot longer with no atmosphere. In an atmosphere, the air can generally wick away thermal energy fairly quickly. Well, on the moon, it didn't happen. So mostly what ended up happening was a lot of the moon particles, the leftovers, the pulverized dust, so to speak, that came from multiple impacts that shot dust up into the air, which then settled down on the moon. Most of that was fairly abrasive and grainy, like glass. So there were astronauts, when they walked on the moon, one particular astronaut couldn't go on his last spacewalk because his spacesuit was cut through at the ankles all the way to the insulating layer because of the lunar soil. It was so abrasive and so grainy. Now, think about how quote-unquote sharp that soil had to be to do that. Yeah. Now, that's the only feature I didn't recreate because I didn't want to handle this and then have to go to the emergency room every time, hey, great shoot. Let us know when you get out of the hospital. I wasn't going to have that happen. So I had a substance. I made a substance that, after doing a lot of research, I made one that actually mimics the static electricity processes that you see in the lunar surface, the powdery nature, okay, and the granularity. You can have different granularities. And so I use that to show a lot of different features and how these features can degrade and evolve on the moon, just from vibrational. Like when another meteor strikes, it vibrates the moon, and this other crater might sag or might have what's called a slope failure, where an element of the slope fails and a little rim breaks off and rolls down into the crater. Stuff like that, I mean, so you have to bring science to the forefront in order to solve mysteries. And, I do that. I want to, because as you do, you guys want to, Now,
yes.
we do it with fun and excitement, of course, but, I mean, it's really fun to make a gigantic moon crater by plopping this gigantic ball bearing down into this substance and watching this massive cloud fly out. Yes. But then when you film it in slow motion and you watch how it falls and the Earth's gravity, all right, and then you extend that to and work it and interpolate it to a 1/6 gravity on the moon, you can see that it's going to go a lot farther, fly a lot higher, and be a far more vast impact. Okay, so. You learn this really cool stuff, and I'm just, I just love that stuff. And so that's why, I'm into trying to find the answers as we want to do, with UFOs or meteorites or asteroids. I want to find the answers.
That's a lovely place to leave it, Mark, as well. For the end of the first hour, I've got so many questions, so we need to get the news out the way and start this second hour, so I can ask you more because I've got loads of burning questions. I know Chris is the same. We'll be back. In
Okay, I'll go
buddy,
take a nap.
Build up that energy. Let's get ready for the next hour. We'll be back in a few seconds on the Asylum.